This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Hello. Before we get started for today, as I keep saying, if you have any suggestions for critical thoughts on any topics relating to game design or the industry, be sure to let me know in the comments below. We got a good one today, as we're going to be talking a little bit about psychology and philosophy, as our critical thought is going to be on the subject of flow and what it means towards playing video games. Now, depending upon your background, you may or may not have heard of the term flow before. This was coined by a Hungarian psychologist whose name I will not be able to pronounce anytime soon. It took me about 6 months to get Bethesda down during the first year of Game Wisdom. This one's not going to be said, but there will be a note to the Wikipedia page down below. But flow is essentially a condition or a kind of feeling by the person when you enter a state of hyper concentration or perfect focusing on a subject or job at hand. This is where you sit down, you do something, and the next minute you know it's 5 hours later and you have no idea what just happened. This kind of intense focus has been considered like a dream for jobs. You know, if people are so focused on a task that they just do it for all day long without complaining, that's great. And it's also a major part of good game design. When you want someone to sit down and be so attentive, so invested in the game that they can't think of anything else. But when it comes to the topic of flow, especially with playing video games, this is where things get a little bit interesting, where the philosophy comes into play. But when it comes to flow, a comparison or a comparative kind of feeling is hyper-focus. And hyper-focus is that kind of intense focus on something where everything else disappears. You know, when you're watching TV like this for hours on end, or you're sitting in front of your computer playing any kind of game, really. It's, you know, that constant stereotype that people use against gamers. You know, you're just focusing on a screen for 5 to 10 hours and nothing else matters. And this is where the challenge of relating it to flow comes into play. Now, the psychologist who coined it, he came up, or he thought up 3 conditions of what can bring about this flow state. The first one is that the activity must have a clear set of goals and you must be able to clearly see the progress. The second one is that whatever you're doing, there must be immediate feedback. The person doing it must know exactly what's going on, what they're doing, and if what they're doing is actually having an impact. And then number 3, there has to be a balance between, I'm reading this from the Wikipedia article by the way, the perceived challenges of the task at hand and their own perceived skill levels. So what that means essentially is that the person needs to know that they're able to do this. They have to be able to realize that whatever this task is, that they have the skills to do it. If they're second guessing themselves, or they're unsure, or they feel overwhelmed, chances are they're not going to enter the flow state. And my little bit of a screenshot here, this was a kind of chart that was made by the psychologist regarding comparing the challenge level of a task to the person's skill level. And I'm not sure if that is too small for you to see, but what he postulated, or what he hypothesized, is that there has to be a balance between the person's skill level and the skill or difficulty of the task. So if the person has no idea what they're doing and the job is incredibly hard and they're feeling overwhelmed, they're going to feel anxiety. If they're doing amazing, if they're awesome at it, but the job is, you know, mind-numbingly easy, then they're just going to feel relaxed. And normally the concept of the flow state occurs when the challenge is high, or the person perceives it to be high, and their skill level can match it. And this is again where we get into philosophy in a sense about when do you achieve flow. And I think I kind of have an example of something that I've been doing lately. I'm not sure if you've been following too much here, but I did take a temporary job, at least through December, you know, bringing a little bit of extra money. The job isn't the most glamorous thing. It's simple data entry. Take orders, put into the computer, move on to the next one. Not the hardest task, But what I did was try to focus so much on the task to go through it as quickly as possible. Use all the keyboard shortcuts I know, figure out the best or the most optimal way of entering the data while dealing with the computer, stuff like that. And I think I achieved a state of flow. When I'm focused enough on it, I can go through 100 pages of their sales orders in about 1 hour or 60 minutes, which isn't too bad. Now, when it comes to flow, and again, this is where we try the philosophy comes in when comparing it against hyperfocus. Hyperfocus, again, is simply just concentrating on something. You may or may not be doing it, but you're still just focused on something so well that everything else disappears. While flow is you're still focusing, but you're performing something. And moving this back into the discussion of the game industry or game design, it's one of those difficulties of trying to determine whether or not we're entering a state of flow while we're playing. Or is it just simply hyper-focus? If my friend Jamie Mackin from Psychology of Games was here, I'm sure we could have a good 20-30 minute discussion on that easily. But when it comes to flow, one thing to realize is that this isn't a superpower or a magic ability. Once you enter flow, you're not going to be able to magically trigger it, at a moment's notice. This isn't turning into a Super Saiyan for Dragon Ball Z fans. As an interesting tangent, I was seeing footage of there's a new Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super. Do Super Saiyans turn blue now? Is that the thing? Because if it is, that's good because I love the color blue. But that's another topic there. But getting back to flow, this is where things get interesting because it's kind of hard to tell what games would trigger this sense of flow. If we go back to the 3 perceived conditions, again, the clear set of goals, immediate feedback, and understanding your skill compared to the challenge, even the most complicated games out there may not trigger the flow state considering these 3 conditions. For instance, in Civilization, you really don't get immediate feedback in that game. Even though Civilization is a very addictive game, it pretty much coined the phrase one more turn, but it's not really something that you're getting immediate feedback on. And that's one of the challenges that we talked about with strategy game design. You perform a task on turn 5 or 6, you have no idea that task is going to come back to bite you 20, 30, 50 turns down the line. Excuse me. And the other part of that, again, is a clear set of goals and progress. When we play a game like Civilization, we have an overarching goal. Beat the game, get the victory condition. But in terms of progress to that goal, it's kind of up in the air because, again, you don't have immediate information as to what the AI is doing. Also, along those lines, something like, this is when we get into the idea of flow in the workplace. Jobs that are just essentially like a constant demand, customer support, food industry, stuff like that, would not really be able to elicit that sense of flow because you don't have a clear set of progress. In a restaurant, for instance, you could serve 50 people a day, you could serve 100 people, you could serve 20. You just don't know. Like going back to my job, I'm given a stack of papers. I know how big the stack is, and that's my job. That's what I have to get done. So I can see as I'm going through this, okay, I got 10 left. Now I got 20 left. Now I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And, one stack goes down as the other stack goes up kind of thing. And again, that's a clear set of goals. I know exactly what I need to do. I know what I have to get done, and I can see my feedback, again, as my to-do pile gets lower. And this is, again, where we get very interesting with talking about game design. Because as we've said, one of the goals, or even sometimes the characteristics of really great games, is eliciting the flow state. But again, the difficulty is, how do we get there? Now, again, this is something that is way too big for a critical thought, and I know I do not have the background to get too far into it. So if there are any psychologists or people who have studied this who have any insights, feel free to leave a comment below. Now, when it comes to game design, one thing that I was thinking about last night as I was coming up with this topic for today is the fact that we can talk about very high level, excuse me, very high level expertise of play. Competitive games, speedrunning, I think, really could be an example of entering the flow state because you have an objective. Beat the game in X amount of time. You must do this, checklist of exploits, advanced play, memorizing patterns, etc. And then it comes down to you running through it, to you performing all those tasks. And again, it is really a set group of information. That's what kind of makes speedrunning different from regular play. And why we can't really consider, I think, every game or every regular kind of gameplay to be flow. For instance, if we talk about stuff like the clicker genre, open sandbox games like Kerbal Space Program or Minecraft, social free-to-play games like Farmville, yes, you can stare at that screen for 4 or 5 hours, but it's more or less a state of hyper-focus than it is flow, by the fact that you're not really performing these tasks at an expert level. But with this kind of critical thought, was either going to be a short one or a long one, depending upon what we get to with the topic. But I'm about out of thoughts here, so I'm going to leave it to you folks. For those of you watching, especially game developers, what do you think about flow, and do you have any examples on your own end, either through playing games or if you've built a game where you've seen or even experienced that state of flow? One thing that I just remembered that I want to bring up, another major part, at least when it comes to playing a video game with flow, is again that sense of harmonizing game design. The player should feel completely in rapture, I guess, if you will, by the game. This is where good control schemes, good UI, and great game design all come together. I think this is also why both speedrunners and action-focused games, I think, have a greater chance of getting to flow rather than abstracted games. Because again, when we talk about action games, this is a one-to-one feedback. If an enemy attacks me, I know immediately how to counter, how to dodge it, and what to respond with. And it just becomes about focusing on performing the task at hand and making sure that these guys are able to react fast enough. And when we talk again about abstracted games, we're not seeing things in a one-to-one relation. I, press the attack button, and now the game's going to decide, how much damage I do, does the enemy block, do they dodge it, stuff like that. But that actually gives me another question. For those of you watching this, do you think RPGs or abstracted-based titles can achieve the flow state in someone? But again, I could just sit here and keep thinking about this for the next 5 minutes, but we'll wrap things up here. So just to summarize, flow is considered the ultimate form of concentration. You are so focused on a task that you're performing that you are doing it, almost as perfectly as you can, and essentially the world just disappears around you. And while we've all have most likely experienced something like that in our lives, that distinction between flow and hyperfocus is a major point of contention. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't go further into these details. But we'll end things here. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the critical thought, of course, be sure to like and subscribe. If you haven't voted on the 1,000 subscriber Mega Let's Play yet, your choices are still a play of the titles from Zachtronics. Oh my goodness, that could really enter either a flow state or an insanity state if you focus too much on those. A play of a grand strategy game from Paradox Software, or a run of one of the massive RPGs from Bethesda. You can leave a vote in any of the critical thoughts, and because of this 2-week period of Christmas or the holidays and New Year's, we'll probably close a vote sometime in early to mid-January. But that's still a few days away from the time of this recording. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I am Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. I will catch you all tomorrow with more great content here and on GameWisdom.com. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.